Welcome back, beautiful souls. Today, I had the absolute honor of interviewing Lindsey Van Wagner on her framework, Inner Space. 5 pillars that have supported her own healing journey, and one that she shares with clients who want to connect with their deeper purpose and meaning here. This conversation flowed so beautifully, and we talked about everything from a particularly low and dark moment that had Lindsey look in the mirror and ask herself, is this the path I still want to walk down, or do I choose to walk down a different path? Her own connection to spirit and how that's evolved. And spoiler alert, it starts with Johnny Cash, to her relationship to nature and animals as a vegan. And what does it mean to make space and prioritize connection as an introvert? This conversation was so beautiful and made me really laugh, think, and pause throughout. I thoroughly enjoyed this one, and I hope you do too. And if you do, please consider subscribing, rating, and reviewing so that this conversation can reach other beautiful souls such as yourself. Without further ado, on to the conversation. Hi, everyone. My name is Jenny. Welcome back to Ampersand. Ampersand is a podcast about the integration of all parts of yourself. Today, I have a wonderful guest with me, Lindsey. Lindsey Van Wagner is a writer, speaker, instructor, and lifestyle coach known for empowering clients to live with a clearer intention, better energy, and peacefulness. She's passionate about behavior change and teaches graduate courses at American University. Her knowledge of health psychology, along with her own personal growth experiences, contribute to her gift of helping others transform their lives. Lindsey, thank you so much for attending.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm really excited.
I'm excited too. For my audience, Lindsey's my first guest. We'll be really diving into tactical tools around wellness and well-being. And from our conversation earlier, preparing for this podcast, you mentioned one that you've created on your own due to your own journey, your own experiences, what's worked, what's not worked, and it's called Inner Space. So I'd love if you could give folks a brief overview and we could dive in from there.
Sure, absolutely. So when we navigate life, a lot of what we find wrong seems to be outside and external. Not enough of this, too much of that, whatever. And so there's so many things outside of our control that what's really helped me is to delve into this inner space. And the SPACE acronym is S for spirit, P for physicality, A for awareness, C for connection, E for evolution. So spirit being everything that's not our physical body, may this be your higher source, your highest self, the sky, nature, anything outside of yourself you can rely on. Physicality is obviously the physical body, taking care of that through movement, etc. We can go deeper into all of these, but I'll just give you the high level view. Awareness is both awareness and acceptance of our emotions and where we are right now, and being conscious of that. Connection is connection with those around us from a sociological perspective and our social circles, macro and micro. And then E is evolution, and that is this need to always be learning and developing and curiosity, right? Because once we have our needs met, we need to go for our basic needs met. There's this Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, like that need to self-actualize and figure out life's meaning and always be learning and seeking and evolving. So that's where the evolution piece comes in.
That's such a beautiful acronym. And I think it's so fitting and it's so kind of resonant with my own journey as well. How important it is to really look inward first to understand what are the internal circumstances that are manifesting things in the physical reality. So for this particular framework that you've created, can you walk us through like the story and the evolution of and creation, truly like the creation of this acronym?
Sure. Yeah, so a little bit of my story. I'm in recovery. I just celebrated 8 years sober a couple weeks ago.
Congratulations.
Yes, which is crazy in and of itself. But I think that was really the launch pad to this journey. I couldn't really do any of this, or would I have wanted to do any of this had I still been using or drinking. So this was born not really of let me improve my life and get better. It was how do I survive? Because a little bit more of me wants to survive than live this reckless lifestyle that I was living. And then how do I survive without those tools? What I saw as tools, I wouldn't have been able to articulate it that way at the time in this life with this body and this mind and these feelings, which is what I was trying to drown away, shrug away, whatever, all of the things. So I've had to develop my own mechanisms in doing that. And so over the years, I kind of have just been trying to fine tune what is it? What is this recipe that helps me function on a day-to-day basis? You know, what do I need? For example, connection, right? That is an external thing, but it feeds me my internal space. So I'm an introvert. If I could do all of this on my own in my room with a book, I would be doing that. I almost have to build into my day, almost like it's like space is my medicine and C is part of my medicine. Right. Maybe I don't feel like going to lunch right now, but that's part you kind of almost have to check that box, because if I don't, then things start to go badly. So it's really just keeping all of these things in balance. And usually if there's something going wacky or wonky with me, it's like what letters, right? E, evolution. Maybe I'm not learning. Maybe I'm stagnant. Maybe I'm not developing and evolving in a way that's filling me, you know? So yeah, it's been kind of a tweaking process, but those are, I think, 5 pillars that can be the framework for anything that one is really dealing with in life.
That's so beautiful. And I really see how, like, you know, you kind of your journey of sobriety has been that launch pad, because it's oftentimes when we clear away the things that don't serve us, we start to receive some of that clarity. So would you be willing to kind of walk us through like that moment in which you realized like this is something you did want to kind of change your relationship with?
Sobriety?
Yes.
Oh, sure. Yeah. So yeah, I call it the gift of desperation, the rock bottom moment. It was definitely, like I said, not just a let me try to be healthier. I wish that was what it was. And it was like 30 days to wellness. But and people might not have seen it at the time, because I kind of lived a double life where I had all the things on paper, the job, all, you know, everything looked great. And I thought it looked great. And so I'm like, why isn't this enough for me? You know, why I have everything I should. And there was this call inside of me that I should be doing something else. And it was too painful to think about. And so I just went crazy with drugs and alcohol, basically. And like I said, I wouldn't have been, it wasn't a conscious thing. Like, I don't want to listen to his voice. I'm going to do this. But that's just looking back, I can see that's what it was. So then, my life was just, again, internally, and only the people who were really, really close to me, in shambles. And so there were a few rock bottom moments where it could have been my rock bottom, but I just think you need every blow until you get there. And so my the final thing for me was I don't know if this is what you were asking, but I was at my mom's house, and I told myself and the guy I was dating at the time, I probably only have 1 or 2 drinks, but maybe not. I might not even, because I was trying to control it a lot at the time. I ended up leaving my mom's house in the middle of the day. I don't remember at all. She lives an hour away. Woke up the next morning, didn't remember how I got home. My dog was in the bed, thank God. But then realizing that I drove with my dog in the car was really what I was, because he passed away 4 years ago, but he's like the reason I'm alive. I mean, there's so many moments where I was just, well, who's going to take care of Brinley? You know, he was my little angel. And so the fact that I put him in danger something clicked. And I remember looking in the mirror and that morning and seeing myself for the first time in a really long time. I think I had been avoiding mirrors and just not really looking into my eyes. And there was this voice that was just, who are you? What are you doing with your life? You know, and I was 27, 28. And it was just this realization that this needs to stop. You're going to die. Do you really want to die? Or are you going to live? And like I said, there was this one small, tiny part of me that was like, maybe you can get better. Maybe you should try to get better. And I did. And and I don't know why. That's grace. That's a moment that I can't explain, but that's the gift of restoration for me. And so that's when things just started to turn around. Right?
Yeah. Get real.
You think about, oh, okay, well, now I'm not drinking. That was my problem. That was only a symptom of my problem. So then I really had to get down to causes and conditions. What was I doing that for?
Yeah, I hear you, and thank you so much for sharing that story.
Sure.
I got chills, and I really relate to just this idea too of like avoiding mirrors, of like not truly seeing ourselves and all of ourselves. And I remember even last year practicing for the first time after I watched somebody on Netflix talk about it, just like this mirror work, this exercise where I would just like strip down naked physically, right? And just like look at myself and take myself in. And at least for me at the moment, it was like not only looking at my eyes, right? And doing that eye gazing, but then also for me trying to practice like not criticizing. It's acceptance. Exactly. Going back to that acceptance piece. But you're so right. Even going back to what you're saying, like that's when the journey gets real. That's when you realize, oh shoot, like I have to look beneath all these things, dive deep within the layers of my being to understand who it is that I truly want to be and become and embody. So can you tell us a little bit about some of those initial kind of realizations for you and some of the work you put in at the beginning that helped you start building the stronger foundation for kind of your emergence?
Sure. And I'm really glad that you phrased it that way. Who do I want to become and be? Because a lot of this, and we're in this self-help era, which is great. And I think we're all working on ourselves. And a lot of it is this concept of like the new you. Who is the new you? And to me, it's not that I'm turning into somebody else, it's that I'm coming to who I actually am. So I'm remembering who I am. I'm transforming into myself and who I am for me instead of creating somebody new. Because we've been there all along. We know all of this. There's just been so many layers built upon us by society, conditioning, messaging that we forget who we are. You know, I say this all the time, but Charles Bukowski said, do you remember who you were before the world told you who you should be? And so that's what it's more of peeling away the layers of who I'm not to come back to who I am. So some of those realizations were, you know, once I cut the alcohol and the drugs, and it was kind of this whole reckless way of being. There was a lot more involved than that. And I had to realize that I was working a job that didn't sit well with my soul, because before I could just go to work, I knew that I had to drink later. I didn't have to really face reality. So now this is uncomfortable.
Right? You're like, oh, sorry.
These voices are talking,
right?
You know, that I haven't been listening to, and they're really hard. And that's where you know, what I touched on earlier is, why can't this be enough? People go to work and then they go home and they have hobbies on the weekends and they, you know, start a family and get a dog and boom, be happy. And that wasn't my journey. And so those things coming to the surface of, well, this is the script that I've been speaking my whole life, but it wasn't mine. So getting rid of that layer, that expectation was then, well, okay, figure out. So So I, admittedly, you can call this bravery or stupidity, fine line. I left all, I worked better.
Mhm.
Down here in sobriety, was hospitalized for a major depressive disorder. I had bipolar disorder. So that was, again, along the journey, one of those major realizations: what's not working for me.
Right.
Now I need to figure out what is. So it's almost like this backwards process of elimination that leads us to that remembrance and that return to ourselves.
Yeah, what you said is so profound and so resonant. Like when you said, asking yourself this question of like, who are you before the world told you who you were? And just this idea of like diving within. I think about how in a lot of ways, like this process of healing, coming home to ourselves is like similar to like a sculptor. And he's like chipping away the pieces of the rock or what have you that isn't part of like this dolphin, they want to sculpt.
Yeah.
And I found that for me personally, it's sometimes been easier to say like, oh, this isn't a part of me versus like, this is part of me.
Yeah.
Which I think is so, so fascinating to your point. Sometimes like it feels a little bit like working backwards and this like constant questioning of like, who am I now?
Yeah.
Like, is this who I am, right?
Absolutely. And when we were talking about acceptance earlier, it's also part of that, because we need to, I think it was Carl Rogers. I love quoting people. I think it was Carl Rogers. I think I'm a roller. The great paradox change, something on. And so I found that to be true. I can't change until I accept where I am today. And I think accepting that a lot of where I am today has nothing to do with me and everything to do with my surroundings is a little more gentle of an approach to all of this change that we try to embody.
Yeah. I mean, that even reminds me of a conversation we had before we even started recording, how I told you how like today I just accepted that I am 5 pounds heavier than I was at the beginning of this year. And it's with that acceptance, right? That acknowledgement of where I am that I can then take steps to change my reality. So I guess diving back to the framework from acceptance, can you tell me a little bit more about your own practices with acceptance, and if you're willing to share any stories with like clients you've supported in this kind of process?
Sure. And the A is awareness. And
awareness.
But as we say that, because when I brought it up, it has so much to do with acceptance, because it's awareness of those feelings and emotions and not judging them. And that's acceptance, right? So just being this neutral witness. So that's a good question with clients. Yeah, so I think one that really helps with that, a tool that I'm a big proponent of and helps everyone that I've told to do, is journaling. And people hate that word. I need to call it something else. Journal, dear. But for real, it helps. Sometimes I'm not even aware of what I need to accept. And my mind is just going a million miles a minute. And so writing it down and just putting it on paper, this is what I tell everyone to do. When you wake up in the morning, before you do anything, reach for pen and paper and just get out whatever is. And maybe there. But sometimes as I put things on paper, that leads me to the awareness of them, which leads to the acceptance, which leads to, so now what do I do about this? And your moment this morning that you shared with me, I had a moment really emotional, and mine was, how am I still struggling with these same things that this is my line of work. How am I still, doing this? And I can either fight it and be hard on myself, or accept it, figure out, and keep going. And so I think it's this also being more neutral to the point of, yeah, not being hard on ourselves for where we are, because we can be in intellectual agreement with these concepts and then wonder why we're still doing the same things. Whereas these are rooted in us, and then we're trying to change them overnight. And those neural pathways are very deep grooves that we need to change. So yeah, I would say just being aware, being mindful, and accepting. And for me, writing those things out is a really
Yeah, I think journaling is such a powerful tool. And I've noticed too, like when I do have that practice of like writing first thing in the morning, it's oftentimes not the initial thoughts that are like the most profound, but I like how an earlier podcast guest said, it's like, what's beneath the grocery list? What's beneath like all the things that you're trying to get at? You're like, this is stupid. I don't like this. Oh, wait, now
right.
Mhm.
And I was joking with a client yesterday because he was asking what journaling's done for me. And I'm like, that's my first filter of this to what gets shared with the world. Like if you're really mad at someone or whatever, and you get it, that's not what I should be saying to that person. That's my visceral, primal instinct. So then it goes through that, and then it goes through maybe a trusted friend. And then I actually approach the issue with person A. Whereas if it went straight from this to that, it's not, I told him I would probably have no friends. So it's that awareness, right? That accept to then be able to live in the world.
That is so true. I mean, you're honestly reminding me of this, like, I guess I'll call it an incident. It's not a problem, but it was like an incident that happened earlier this week where I'm back on the dating apps and I connected with somebody who I thought would be a good fit. And we had this phone call date scheduled. I had it on my calendar. He joked, he's like, it feels like I'm setting up, a work call. And I was like, that's not a big deal, but he ended up missing it. And so I had to take a beat and I had to tune into what was coming up for me. And part of me was feeling confused. Part of me was honestly feeling like, well, I kind of saw this coming. Which is good and bad, right? It's a fine line because I've been stood up before. Like I know now to very much detach from the outcome and just like sometimes let things be. But I also acknowledge that like 3 hours before we missed this call, he had sent me a photo of a vegan apple cake recipe that I sent to him. And he was like, oh, we'll send you a photo whenever I bake. And I was like, oh, he's never going to bake it. I didn't tell him that, but I was like, oh, he's just like, I'm just like sending a recipe out to the void. And like, and we literally, I was like, whoa, he actually baked this cake. And so I was like grappling with a lot of this confusion and annoyance and kind of like, oh, who cares? It doesn't matter. And so like it was so helpful to just like pause and just process that on my own, process it with friends before going back to him being like, hey, what I actually sent was like, hey, I think we got our wires crossed. Like, we're still talking. He's like, oh, I'm so sorry. Like, I totally missed it. I had on calendar for tomorrow. So I'm just thinking about how like, you're so right. Like sometimes we need to filter things through multiple like avenues before we're ready to show up in the way that like we want to show up ourselves.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And those aren't bad initial reactions. We're just protecting ourselves.
Totally.
Right? So that's just an evolutionary, survival mechanism, if you will. But now I want to hear them. That's
the date's supposed to be tonight, so I'll let you know.
Okay, we need a round 2 tomorrow.
But anyways, going back to the framework, I want to go back to S, which is spirit, and ask you, because I know my definition of spirit has evolved, but like, can you tell us about what that latest iteration has been for you, and like maybe a little bit about what that, like going back to eat, like the evolution and journey of that.
Yeah, that's been a great question. So spirit, I know also connotes the word God or religion and stuff. So I'll do a brief overview of that. For some reason, the way I was raised in my concept of religion, my interpretation of it was a very like harsh, judgmental presence that it felt very fear-based to me. if you do this wrong, this is the punishment. And so once I started living, and I considered myself to be fairly religious growing up. Once I started drinking and drugging and doing hideous things, I couldn't have any contact with that in my head because I had gone so far astray that being would never even want to look at me because I was so ashamed. So how could I had stopped praying, I had stopped. I don't think I was atheist, like I knew there was something there, but I just couldn't face it. And so once I started recovery and getting sober, a big part of the program that I'm in is to choose your conception. And at the time, I couldn't go back to that idea because I was, like I said, so my God that I chose, my higher power, was Johnny Cash because I could relate to him. And it literally, and it still is just because that's so, it's so powerful to me. I just picture this guy who's done it all, seen it all. And I'm talking to him and he has a cigarette hanging out of his mouth. And he's like, dude, girl, you gotta chill here. And it's not this big separation of a man on a cloud and like literally the man in black, who I can relate to and who accepts that darkness. So that's a visual of where I started and where I still, that's my main identification. But spirit has grown to mean so much more to me now. I mean, I think that we are all created from some higher entity, which means that we are part of that entity. So we have that in ourselves and we have the power to create. So I think everything that we do in our purest forms before we get muddied with all those layers is an extension of spirit. And maybe that's creative intelligence, maybe that's science, maybe that's love, whatever what you believe in that keeps this world going around is maybe your spirit, and really just this concept of anything outside of yourself that you believe has more power than you. Because I think when we think that it's all up to us and we're in this isolated sense of control freak and everything has to go this way, it's very, very lonely and defeatist. And then it's what's life all about anyway, And so just realizing that we're just one tiny, tiny piece of this puzzle, yet part of what created it.
I hear you. And I also appreciate you sharing your initial, like Johnny Cash was somebody who you initially identified and resonated with, because I think for a lot of people who come from these like religious traumatic backgrounds, or even come from backgrounds in which their parents didn't believe in a higher power, it can feel very intimidating at times to ask themselves like, well, what more is out there? Who is it that I resonate with? And does it have to be this man on a cloud with a long beard? Like, what if that version of God's spirit, what have you, doesn't resonate with me? And if that doesn't, then what can I gravitate towards? And I so appreciate you sharing that, because I think it just goes to show that like, it doesn't have to be, it doesn't have to be a certain way or a certain thing or a certain person, because I think for me, part of my evolution has been realizing that I feel very connected to Mother Earth. And so like the trees, the plants, the fungi that are here make me feel connected to this source, this entity that's greater than all of us. It makes me realize that like, it's so beautiful that we get to be like in connection and recognize that we are a small piece of that puzzle. Yet I can also hear some people potentially saying, well, if I'm so small, right? Why do I,
Yeah, that's the tough. I can see that. There's a lot of paradoxes in all of this. I want to write a book about just that. Which one would I do? The acceptance, and then it's never stopped working hard. So it's like all of this. But yeah, I totally, and that's why I'm very careful to say that my interpretation of it. Like I was talking to somebody else who was raised in a similar religion, and they still identify with that religion. And, they said, I didn't feel that. I've only felt love and connection with this. So it's definitely a me thing, and how things were explained to me, or how my brain processed them. And so it's not that I have a problem with organized religion. I just think that it does confuse a lot of people.
For sure, for sure. And you're so right. I think it's such a good reminder for me too, because even though I have heard, I guess lately, a lot of stories of religious trauma, that doesn't necessarily mean everyone who grew up in like sometimes that dogmatic background, right, has that fear-based relationship with a higher power. But in terms of like your connection to like spirit and this like, larger entity, what are some ways in which you feel that connection? How do you know? How do you deeply know?
That's such a good question. So I like that you brought up nature, Mother Nature, because that can almost always put me in my place, meaning realizing that I'm the center of the universe. So I love animals, and I'm vegan, and I have chickens. And so just sitting outside with them and watching them, and animals are so inspirational to me, because we tend to think of them as these simpletons who just eat and sleep and hunt and whatever. But they have it right. Like, they're not timekeeping like we are. They just live, and it's like, I just watch that, and I'm just in such envy, and they hold such wisdom in it, and it seems so simple. But yeah, so when I have those connections with animals or nature, or just sitting, and I can sit for hours and just watch anything. I think of those movies where it's like an apocalypse and there's nothing happening, and then all of a sudden someone finds this one green leaf rotting from the ground. We have that all around us everywhere all day, and yet we just take it for So when I try to see the world through fresh eyes, and wonder, then that really helps me reconnect. And I think slowing down gives me the chance to see those moments and honor them. Whereas I can't even, if I'm living in a way where I'm overbooked or losing sight of what matters, I can't slow down. So it just becomes really cloudy. So that definitely helps me connect, just being outside in nature, meditating, obviously, and just sitting still and coming back to the present moment. Which I heard someone say, a yoga teacher said last week, that if you're not here right now, you're nowhere. And I'm blown away. And I thought, I'm nowhere all the time, because I'm certainly not in this room right now, thinking when I was in space mentally. So yeah, I think just connecting, anchoring back to that, and writing really is mine. It kind of a prayer when I'm confused, because I'm writing, what am I doing? What do I do about this? Maybe try this. And I almost feel like when I ask the question, worries about that, then life answers me in some way.
So true. I so relate to you when it comes to like nature meditation and writing. In terms of nature, yesterday I just like took a walk, and I was about to walk the same path I always do, but I was like, what if I took a different path? And then I actually saw so many animals, and we're lucky, truly lucky, that we live in Montgomery County, Maryland, and there's just so much green space, so much nature. So I actually started to like look down, and I actually noticed in my walk, I've noticed 3 dead butterflies, which is probably like something else I want to interpret later. And
how do you go?
Science. Right? I'm like, what is this a sign of? I guess quick thought there is, I think it's a sign of the importance of accepting death in order for rebirth to happen. But put a pin in that.
A good one. Yeah.
And then I saw like this beautiful doe. this doe was just like tucked away by the side of the road. And if I had not looked in that direction,
Yeah.
I would not have spotted it.
Yeah.
And then I saw like cicadas. I don't know if you've seen any, but there's definitely a few around now. And just, I was so grateful that I like had decided to go on a different walk and also decide to actually try like looking down, looking up, looking side to side. And also what you said about like, if you're not present, you're nowhere. That like, hurts a little bit.
It does, because I really don't think that.
Right. And I'm constantly doing mental gymnastics. I think especially since I started pursuing, I mean, way before then, but I feel like it's been humbling to notice how like I'm in this spiritual space, right, where I want to offer certain offerings around like coaching, plant medicine guidance, etc. Yet, I guess this is the beauty, right? But it's like, yet like we're still practicing. Like I'm still practicing like coming back to the present while also trying to make money as an entrepreneur and like doing those mental gymnastics about like, okay, how do I like market this? How do I plan for the future? But you're so right. Like the more we could just like back here, I think it's so special. We're really able to like notice things.
Yeah. I mean, just thinking of that, visualizing you taking your walk and even having the to say, let me try this way, and listening to those little whispers and nudges. If you don't have space in your day to do that, then you miss those things.
It's so true. And even what you were saying about animals, about how like they teach us to live.
Yeah.
And that's it. Like, and it makes me wonder too, it's not like, why are we here? But like, we are here to live. And even going back to the present, like living is about living in the present for me anyways.
Absolutely. And just being is doing things too.
And I think that's been one of the hardest concepts for me to truly embody. Because so many of us have been raised to believe that we are only worthy for producing. Like our worth, and and a lot of our worth for a lot of people is tied to like how much am I getting paid. It just like it sometimes creates this vicious cycle where you feel like if I'm not producing, if I'm not doing, if I'm not acting, then I'm not worthy.
Yeah.
So can you tell us a little bit about your relationship with like being and doing?
I would love to. Yes. So I think that I have a few things going through my head. So a lot of what you're talking about is, I think of as input and output. And if we can't justify what we're inputting because we don't know the exact output, then why are we doing it? I think that's how it wasn't about this. What is this 5 minutes you're spending on this? What is that going to do? What are you doing? So if in our world of capitalism, if you're only going by financial security, it limits you. Because that's what I was doing. And I was rising up and up and up the GS government ladder, and promotion after promotion. I had just gotten promoted before I had my, whatever you want to call it, psychotic break, which I think see now is a breakthrough, more than a breakdown. But everything looked good, but it wasn't the ladder wasn't against the right wall. I wasn't doing something I was identifying as success. So now my metrics for success have changed greatly. And that's like, how do I feel just being, and I live very minimally, so I don't need all of the stuff that I was chasing anyway. And I'm trying to, it is a little counterintuitive because I am trying to change my outlook on wealth and abundance, because it's general to some extent. Yeah, now it's I try not to judge myself based on how much have I done today and what can it all be fit to equal.
Right.
I live a very blessed life. success is. Sometimes it's niece. Do this with you if I was working in my. So yeah, it's different, and I think that's where identifying our values comes in, because for some people that is their metrics. They enjoy that, and wealth and is the end game,
Right.
if you will. It just, whether it's wealth or whatever you're chasing, when you're so focused on the outcome that you can't be in the present. Because even with that, it's like, okay, but then the next car, and then the next thing, then I'll be happy when I, or when the next kid graduates from college, then I'll be happy, then I'll be happy. And we can all get stuck in there without just being okay. Stuff. Well, once I have this book out, once I have this, and so I still get caught up the next day. So I think it really is just that being okay in the moment is when I feel I'm living successfully, and knowing that I'm doing, living, talking in a way which I don't think so.
Right. And to your point, it goes back to getting clarity around your values, because for some people, one of their top values could be money.
Right.
And that's not something, either of us are going to judge, but it's like, that's their prerogative.
Yeah.
If that's what gives them joy, then like more power to them. But I'm also realizing for myself, similar to you, that I've shifted my values. It used to be, I wanted to, be like the chief product officer and like continue to climb the career ladder in a certain way and get certain titles and get all this external validation, because I myself didn't feel like I was worthy as I was.
That's a good.
I wasn't sitting in my being. I wasn't comfortable with that. I felt like all I could do, all I could chase was doing. And I've had to take a few moments to, even with this podcast, and recognize that I need to, I feel like this is something I've been realizing about life as well, and something that relates to what you were mentioning, but like, so much of life is being in the journey. Like, very rarely are we ever at like the destination. Yes. And I realized with my podcast, I was feeling a little bit of like this need to like get in certain views, even though I knew I started it with the intention of it being like a fun sandbox, etc. And so something I've been practicing doing as well related to that, or just like being, I suppose, is just like actually celebrating my milestones.
Yeah.
And being happy with where I am in each moment. And I'm celebrating this, like another interview in this beautiful space with you. And I'm just so grateful that whenever I can like reshift my relationship with like falling in love with the journey, falling in love with like the being, and acknowledging that just because my values have shifted, just because I've deprioritized certain things, doesn't make me bad.
Yes.
It's something I've had to kind of rewire. So for you, since you did mention values, what are some of those values, and how do you know that you're living in alignment?
That's a good one. So peace is a big one. Quality time. I'm going into a little bit of love language stuff here, but
that's a big one for me too.
Quality time, which I think goes along, and just that ability to just as about feeling us. Okay. And so, and it's tough not to fall into that, like you were saying, because you're right, so much of life is spent in the journey, not these big grandiose moments that we actually celebrate, right? Like if you're planning for a wedding, the wedding's this tiny, tiny part. It's all in the moments, you know, that happen before that. So I think when I feel in alignment, I feel peaceful, I feel safe. That's a big one for me, safety, security. And I mean that in a way, safe to be myself, my authentic self. So when I'm with people like yourself who are in part of this movement of discovering the truth, and I don't have to hide parts of me. And that's why I love how your Ampersand is all about integration, and I can just truly show up who I am. That's the more that I'm in those settings, those spaces, these feelings of connection that are so profound. That's how I know.
Yeah, seriously. I think you're so right. It's like the communities, the spaces, and the places that, and also our own self-awareness and our own growth
Yeah.
that allows us to cultivate the sense of like safety, in the sense that like, oh my God, I can actually show up with all parts of myself and not be judged. And I think part of my own journey related to that is realizing to let go of certain places, spaces, jobs, boxes, even like clothes, you know, that like just don't fit anymore. And I think that's been particularly challenging for me. I mean, I've had moments where I'm just like, oh, I'm like so good at letting go, you know? You're like, I'm so good at this. And then the universe like just says like, no, you still have to practice. No, there's still things that you're having trouble letting go of. So
It's so cool.
yeah, what have been some of your, I guess, recent experiences with like letting go of like these things that are, I don't know, making you feel like you can't be yourself?
Yeah, boundaries have become very important. I know it's a buzzword right now, but it's so true. And something that shifted for me was, you know, it's one thing when I'm talking about my own well-being and saying, oh, I'm gonna let go of this person who's not good for me. That was way more difficult for me until I got to the point of why am I here and what's my mission? And then does this person support my mission, meaning my clarity and my ability to further my mission? That's an easy yes sir, you know. Whereas if it was when it was all about, oh, Lindsey Van Wagner, is this best for Lindsey or not? It was hard to make that distinction because now is this supporting my purpose and my ability to spread my message and live how I want to live? And that's just an easy, that makes it way easier, you know. And so it's not easy all the time, but that's really, really clarified things. And it's taken myself and all the personal stuff out of it. It's almost like, does this support the bigger picture of life? Yes.
I love that. You're so right, because it depersonalizes things. It makes it about like you and this higher purpose that you're serving, as opposed to like, do I like the way I'm not saying you're doing this, but it's like, do I like the way they look, like, etc.
Yeah.
So I really think that's such a great question. I think it goes back to your framework and the C, like the connection piece, and how even in connection with ourselves or with others, we have to know when and where to set boundaries that we like, you know, it's like a firm line. It's like, you're not going to cross this. So can you tell us a little bit more about that connection piece for you, and how, I mean, you mentioned a little bit of like the introvert piece and how it's something that you've realized you need to make space for on a regular basis.
Yeah, so I actually, as far as the connection and the making those decisions of it's pretty easy to tell when you are connecting with someone and you're bettering their life, they're bettering yours. There's this equal exchange. Sometimes it's harder to tell when you need to let go of somebody who's not contributing to that. And it can be really intuitive, but when in certain circumstances, your intuition can get very, if you're not living healthy, very scattered. And so this is a more black and white way to look at it if somebody's struggling, but I had to end a relationship a couple of years ago. And the way I think of it now, it's almost like we're all our own boss of a company. And we all have these people in our lives who serve certain functions and help us with different things, right? And if there's one person on the team who's just constantly like messing things up for you, and why are you keeping them on the payroll? Payroll meaning your time, your energy, your state, like all of those things. That's going to start to dismantle the whole team. There's only so much you can do for this person. Maybe they're not a bad employee or a bad person, but they're not building to your company. You're not building up your company or your cause. And so what's the ROI? What's the return on investment there? You're putting in all of this, and all that's you're getting back is damage, and it's a very, I know it's a very convenient metaphor, and life isn't like that. And sometimes you have people in your life that you can't take off the payroll. But you can manage your expectations around it, or your interactions with them, or set those boundaries. You don't have to have a conversation at the water cooler with them for 3 hours, So that happened, to make it a little more personal. Yeah. So when I broke up with my ex-boyfriend a couple of years ago, it was hard. So hard. And I didn't realize how damaging it was until I got that peace back, but it had to be done. I wouldn't be sitting here right now. It had to be done. And not just for me, for everybody that I touch, it has a ripple effect.
Yeah, you're so right. Like, those long relationships can be the hardest to let go of, can be the hardest to like sever and realize it's actually better for both of us, and for like your cause, and for the world
and
too.
For his too.
Right.
Absolutely.
Right.
And the reason I like the ROI or the investment piece is, I think we might have talked about this before too, like, but I've invested so much in this person, and okay, so are you going to invest 2 more years and then be in the same,
Yes.
So and people can change and all of that. And this guy's a great guy, just wasn't for me, so it's kind of, sometimes logic does have to come into the picture when making certain decisions.
Yeah, that is true. And you're even going back to something you're saying, like, you're right, your intuition can get muddied, especially when you're connecting with certain people, or you're like your physicality, or like other things in like your inner space, right, are not necessarily in tune or in alignment. Because I remember with like a few previous relationships, like I remember for one of them being shocked when people would tell me, this person's not good for you, this person's gaslighting you. I was like, what do you mean? He's like the best thing since sliced bread. I was like, such a person. But then when
exactly,
and I actually am so grateful he ended things with me, because it took like time for me to really process and sit with the fact that, wow, like what my friends were saying was true. Yet in some ways I almost like discounted it, because I was like, oh, but I trust myself, I trust my intuition. I'm not saying like don't trust your intuition, but I'm just making the point that sometimes it can get muddied through this conditioning, through even like seeing my parents and the relationship they had, and believing that like relationships had to be a certain way, that like, oh, there's no, and I think a story that I was telling myself in this particular relationship was like, oh, I've learned so much, there's no way I would fall for or get into connection with somebody who doesn't actually treat me well. And I was like, oh wow, damn.
Oh gosh, that could be a whole, we need to do a part 2 codependency, because that's still something I struggle with so much. And a lot of this messaging but work together, I don't know, it's just, and it's a personal call, but at this point in my life, because of the work that I'm doing and the fact that I've been gifted this mission, is how I look at it, I have an obligation to fulfill that I can't mess up. So it goes beyond my comfort, and if I want to.
I think about that too sometimes, even just going back to just this idea that, at least that I've come to terms with, is the fact that fear is real. Fear is going to stay with us, especially in moments when we're extending beyond our comfort zone, reaching into the unknown. And for me, I've had to get comfortable with the fact that fear is ever persistent, yet I can always move to the other end of that polarity, right? I could tap into the courage, my inner lioness, and find the courage to do the things and be the way that I'm meant to be, because like I do really feel like you and I and everyone here, everyone on this planet is here for a reason. We're meant to serve some sort of higher calling or purpose. And it's okay if you don't know what that is, but I don't know if that resonates with you. I feel like it's something for me that gives me meaning and purpose.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, it does. And not knowing what it is part of it. And it doesn't have to be this grand lightning strike moment of, oh, now I know I'm meant to go down and feed starving children. It's like, what's my first purpose right here, right now? It's to talk to you and help deliver a message, right? That's what's my purpose when I'm standing in line in the grocery store, to not cuss under my breath. You know? So, and that's coming back to the here and now instead of all this drama we put around. And it's a good question that we're asking here for that. That's the meaning of life. We've been wondering since far back in history, all the philosophers, you know, it's a good question, but yeah, don't get so that it disables you from the day to day.
100%, because I've definitely been on both ends of the spectrum. One of them being like, oh crap, like I thought this was my purpose and it's no longer my purpose, and now I don't know what to do. Should I just lie in bed and like think about this and swallow and be sad? And I know, I so appreciate this reframe, because you're so right. It can be as simple as like, what is my purpose in this? And my purpose in this moment is like to have this conversation, to hold space and to be present to things you're saying, so I can respond, or just like, it's just, this is flow for me.
This is, you asked when I know that I'm at it. This is it. And that's not something I can quantify, you know. But in all those moments of living, just brings you to those bigger moments. Build up.
You're really bringing us full circle. It's so good. Can you tell us about that evolution of your purpose? Because I guess I listened to a podcast yesterday, and like she calls it dharma, and how like there is like this process in which like you can start with like not knowing what it is, and you start to explore it. And there's even, she said, there's even a point where like certain people start transcending that, you know, which I think is so fascinating. So I'm curious, like, how's your purpose evolved, you know?
I definitely was stuck in a while in that analysis paralysis, which it sounded like you were describing without just staying in bed. Because I'm like, there's so many things I could do. There's so many things I'm interested in. I'm not going to do.
You're like, might as well just not do anything. Fine.
Right, because if you putting that this down, very an overthinker, which can work to my advantage. So be paralyzing. So mine is, you know, and that's such a good question. How has it evolved? I learned what wasn't working first, right? Back to the shedding the layers and learned what wasn't my purpose. And recently have just been having a very loose idea of it that gives me the flexibility for those moments of the unknown, and let's follow this path, you know, and I've never done a podcast, let's do it. Who knows what so thank you so much. I'm so excited about this. And so it's a really good question, because it's not something that I sat there and said, okay, now I know purpose. It just started happening by me being vulnerable and helping people and really showing up as myself, to people telling me, this is what you need to be doing. You know, you need to be people tell me those in my darkest moments. What are you talking about? I
Right,
can help
right.
people, I want to, I just literally don't want to live anymore, and by sharing myself and being authentic, I guess that has some effect on people. And so how I've reframed it now in the scope of the big picture is, if I can be more me and that helps you be more you, then you be more you and pass it on to them, and that's what I think, like you said, we're all here for a reason. We very, very much are. By not living that, embodying that, or at least giving yourself the chance to do that, who are you robbing of your gifts and your mission? Our embarrassment, vulnerability of, oh, I've never done this. Who am I to decide that
Yeah.
nobody needs to hear it?
Yeah. And I really like how you described it, your purpose and how it's evolved as like not necessarily this like lightning strike moment of like,
Yeah.
oh my God, this is my purpose.
Right,
It's
right.
like really going back to what we've been saying this whole time. It's like in the small moments.
Yes.
In the moments in where you're sometimes intentionally or unintentionally just showing up as yourself. Sometimes in your darkest moments, and
Yeah.
people say like,
Yeah.
wow, I see this in you. I see this light in
Yeah.
you.
Absolutely.
And I think it's so beautiful sometimes the people that are closest to us that really support our mission, right? It's oftentimes what I found, I've like definitely found this in myself as well, but like sometimes they're able to shine a light on you when you're not able to shine that light outwards.
Yeah. And they
You know.
see something in, because you were being, and now people, and you aim to something why.
Yeah, that's so true. Even like now reflecting on like this conversation on like purpose and dharma, something I've been thinking about is how my purpose doesn't necessarily have to be just related to a job and just the way that I make money. And that was something that was so profound for me because I thought that I had to do it through a job only. And if I didn't do it through a job, then I was a failure. But then I had like a conversation with my therapist earlier this week, and I realized something that just resonates right now where I'm at is like, I love holding space. And I think the way that I hold space, especially when I'm present, especially when I'm flown, is the way that I want others to hold me.
Yeah.
So and I just realized like, wow, I can hold space in so many different ways, and it doesn't have to be just in ways that people pay me money for.
Right.
Right.
Just how you live.
Right. And how you live.
And how you express yourself and let others express themselves. Yeah. And I'm glad you say that, because it absolutely does not have to be occupation. Your occupation can be very different from your purpose.
Right. Yeah, that's so true.
Too. For sure.
And then I feel like sometimes too, when I'm not sure like what that grandiose mission is, I come back to something you've said that resonates with me, which is like, you know what? I'm here to just be my full self. And if me being my full self is going to enable and empower others to practice that, to step out and be like, no, this is actually who I am, then that is fulfilling. And I'm not saying like that is, I'm still not sure if like that's like my higher calling or purpose, but something that I feel is so true for so many different people. Like the more each of us shows up exactly as we are, exactly as like Jenny Chen's, Lindsey Van Wagner's that we were before the world told us who we were. The world is going to be such a much, loving place.
Yes, that's so beautiful. I love that. Yeah, I found that some of my most meaningful connections today have been, maybe I don't know someone that well, and I'm not having a good day, and I just totally am feeling vulnerable and cry, and then after I meet with them, I'm again, and then they become one of us because they appreciate it, and I find that to be more revealing of the things that I thought I should be painful are really like my pain points are almost sometimes the portals for connection, and how beautiful is that?
Yes. And that reminds me, since we both love quotes, the quote, the wound is where the light enters.
Yeah.
And you're so right. I think it's in moments where I share my darkest moments, my darkest nights of soul. And it depends, right, on like whether someone's open to receiving that.
Yes.
But I find that with the right people, it truly is that portal. And it truly is like that pathway to remembering for them.
Mm-hmm. And if they're not receiving that and then that doesn't align with them, then that's fine. That's good data too. Right. And I had to kind of, when I decided to commit to this work, I was very much like, I need to please everybody. And now I realize that I'm not talking to the people who are going to judge me for the things that I'm vulnerable. I'm talking to people who are from it. Mm-hmm. So sometimes I do overshare and it's not the right moment and it's exciting, I get that day or whatever. That person separates and that's fine. That's not who I'm being for.
So true.
Yeah. And that's not going to affect how I continue to, portray myself to the world, which is as authentic. Yeah. I only know one way to.
Or like the moments in which I try to go back, I get nudges or signs in the universe that like this isn't for you.
Yes.
And I was like, God damn it. Then like what, but then you're so right. It's just like sometimes it's like regrounding or noticing that like those signs of things that don't feel good are as powerful or if not more powerful than the signals of like what's flowing, what does feel good.
Yeah. You can tell when you're forcing.
Yeah. To conclude our podcast, I'd like to ask, what are some words that you would use to describe the essence of who you are in this exact moment, in the present?
Who I am? As a construct, as adjectives, can you give me an example?
Yeah, one of my friends, something I've been talking about with a friend is just this idea that like, I don't know, sometimes when you're feeling lost, all you have to do is pause and just take a look at like what's in your basket or like what is that like? I like food. I like dishes. I'm like, what does my dish look like? What are some like ingredients in that dish? It could be something like that. But like I guess I'd love to hear words that describe not your physicality, right? But like maybe like your soul, like your being.
I'm blonde. My name's Lindsey. It's like the things that we want to define it, right? Right. It's the opposite of what exactly I want to say, which is say. Oh my gosh, in this moment, I am beautiful chaos. I was gonna say organized chaos, but beautiful, imperfect, brilliant.
Good. Oh, thank you so much for sharing that. And I resonate with that. And I'm sure so many people will resonate with that as well. Thank you so much for coming on. Where can people find more information about you and connect with you?
Sure. I'm on Instagram at Spirit Vigilante. So at Spirit Vigilante. And then my website is thespiritvigilante.com.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jenny. This is so great.
Oh, okay. Yay. Okay.
That was such a beautiful conversation with Lindsey. Really lit me up and gave me so much gratitude for people like her that are so generous with sharing the frameworks and tools that have supported them and make it real by sharing their stories. If you're in this moment feeling a little bit like, well, dang, do I like the person that I've become? Is this the person that I meant to embody? Or is there something greater? Is there something bigger? How can I embody the most beautiful, boldest version of myself? One that, when spirit or my higher purpose calls, I am the kind of person who feels the fear, but taps into my courage and does it anyways. You do it anyways because you know that you're here for a reason and that you are here to be the full expression of yourself and know that even when people judge you, that's okay because they're going to judge you anyways, and they might as well judge the most authentic and full expression of you. If you're really feeling like you'd love support unpacking this, uncovering this, I help women and BIPOC people reconnect with their wholeness and their joy, because your wholeness, your joy, and awakening to the truth of who you are is our birthright. It is a journey that not many and not all choose to pursue. But if you do choose to embark on this heroine's or hero's journey, it'll yield incredible results and rewards and gifts because of the challenges and difficult moments you may and you probably will encounter as you dive within the depths of your being. If you're feeling called to walk down this path and be one of the brave, truly be one of the brave, come join me. I'm ready to coach you and support you in walking down this path and reconnecting with your wholeness and understanding who you are underneath all the conditioning, such that you can shine in the way that you are meant to shine. I have limited coaching spots available every season. So if you feel called to work with me or explore potential coaching engagement with me, let's talk. My first coaching session is free. It's 60 minutes. So truly, you have nothing to lose. What are you waiting for? The fully embodied version of you is just beyond the corner. And it's waiting for you to arrive.